Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by Congressional reporter Kate Scanlon. Kate, gun control has obviously become a major issue again. We've had a recent spate of mass shooting events. President Biden, Congressional Democratic leadership really want to bring up a gun control bill, but there's always been problems in terms of getting enough support to pass this kind of legislation, no matter what kind of events are going on. What is sort of the status of some of the negotiations on this?
So the key thing for any lawmaker who wants to reform or overhaul gun laws is basically to meet that 60-vote filibuster threshold in the Senate. And in order to do that, Democrats would have to win Republican support. And so in order for them to accomplish any of these things legislatively, they are really going to have to come up with a bipartisan deal. And so this week, we're seeing some efforts made toward that happening, but you know, that remains to be seen whether they can reach an agreement.
So I mean, because of the filibuster, you need 10 Republicans, a minimum of 10 Republicans to support whatever legislation they agree to. And that's assuming that you can get Senator Joe Manchin, who obviously has been the key Democratic swing vote on a lot of issues, on board with whatever this legislation is. And if you can't, then you need more than 10 Republicans. So it's really a pretty heavy lift.
It is, but there are some signs that Democrats are taking heart in during these negotiations. One is Texas Senator John Cornyn seemed open to some negotiations on this. He has negotiated on this before, but obviously there's a new light on it, given that this most recent tragedy happened in his home state. There's a couple other Republicans. Susan Collins has indicated openness to incentivizing red flag laws, things like that. So there does seem to be some room for a certain narrow slice of reform that you might be able to get enough Republicans on board for, but you know, that remains to be seen.
So now one of the reasons that they think red flag laws might be able to attract some Republican support is because it's not necessarily banning certain categories of weapons that are widely owned by gun owners, and it's not necessarily imposing new restrictions on gun owners or firearms dealers, but it is dealing with potentially a mental health aspect of the mass shooting issue, which a lot of Republicans want to see there be some focus on, and some of the other issues that are not necessarily directly related to gun ownership. But some gun owners groups don't like these laws.
Exactly. The thing with red flag laws is it is a safeguard against people who have mental illnesses. You know, it allows law enforcement to intervene earlier in the process than they might be otherwise, but there are groups that express due process concerns with these laws, and so I think that's part of the reason you're seeing this effort to incentivize the states doing it themselves rather than the federal government coming in and doing it to appease some of those concerns. So whether that's enough to win enough Republicans over, obviously we'll have to see.
No, obviously this is all happening in the context of an election year, and as much as lawmakers will insist that they don't allow electoral politics to intrude on such important matters, on life and death issues, clearly that is an important aspect of this, and there are a lot of Democrats who would like to run on the gun issue in the fall. And there are also a lot of Republicans who, based on the history of Democrats losing control of Congress after the assault weapons ban passed in 1994, who wouldn't mind having this issue as something to campaign on either. Talk a little bit about the political dynamic of this.
That's another thing for Democrats to factor in if they do want to put a bill on President Biden's desk is, you know, the political winds right now look like they might be facing the loss of the House in November, which would make this again a harder lift. So they really do have a deadline on this too, which might be spurring some of those bipartisan negotiations in the Senate because they really are running out of time, at least for right now, if they'd like to do it.
And speaking of running out of time, the Democrats, you know, they may lose their majority. A problem they face is that they've had difficulty getting things done. They didn't get Build Back Better passed. They haven't been able to get any voting reform bills passed. They haven't so far been able to get anything related to guns passed. So there's just sort of been this pileup of unpassed legislation. The abortion bill that they tried to pass, they couldn't even get a simple majority vote in the Senate for it. How demoralizing could that be for Democratic voters in the midterms?
I think you're seeing that it already is demoralizing Democratic voters. I think that's why you saw Senator Chuck Schumer the other week say, he doesn't want to have a show vote on this, which is why he's allowing the bipartisan negotiation to play out, while again emphasizing that he will ultimately hold what he called an accountability vote, because he wants people to see where their senators stand. But it definitely is a factor in, it's loss after loss after loss in some respects, which doesn't set them up well electorally in November.
And when they've done some of these accountability votes, some might call them messaging votes, they've tended to bring more extreme bills to the floor rather than bills that could maybe pick off a Republican or two.
Exactly, and I do think there is an effort being made this time to avoid a scenario like that. That's why you see Senator Chris Murphy is making a very public show of bipartisanship to his Republican colleagues. He even this week had an op-ed explaining his position that ran in Fox News, which goes to show that not only is he reaching out to his Republican colleagues, he might be reaching out to their constituents as well, trying to make his case for finding some what he called a common denominator between the groups.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
You can read Kate and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.